All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. You are, in fact, as the big, bright, shiny thing above us says, in the Game Artist panel. And I am on a panel with a bunch of game artists, which works out pretty nicely. First off, my name is Adrian Butsky. I am the host of a show called Nerd for a Living. It is a podcast. It is free. Go download it. It is conversations with working professionals in what we call the geeky entertainment industries. So comics, gaming, animation, film, TV art, crafting, publishing, any place where you have genre storytelling and fun nerdiness. That's what we're all about. So you can find us on iTunes and all those kinds of things. If you are on the Twitters and you like to interact, ask questions, share stuff, or hear nuggets of wisdom that you would like other people to know about, these are the Twitter accounts for everybody who is up here. Hopefully I got them all correct because I had to use the Google late last night and I was tired. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go right down the line and have each one of you guys give your name, tell me what you do and what games you've worked on, and then we'll get to the chattiness. Start with you, Anita.
All right. My name's Anita. I am an artist for a game called Shard, but I've worked on a couple other games in the past. I've done the art for a card game called Go Extinct. It's an educational game about evolutionary trees for kids. And I've also worked with Girls Make Games as a volunteer artist and then also as a paid artist on one of their first projects, which was called The Whole Story.
Excellent. I'm TJ Hughes. I work for Happy Badger Studio. I'm a technical artist for them, and I also start my own company called Terrifying Jellyfish. And so I've released a game called Fish on Steam earlier this year, and I'm currently working on Smugglecraft, which is a PS4 hovercraft racing game. Coming to PS4, and I'm also working on a project called Noor. It's not really a game, it's mostly just like food art. I'm demoing it in the other room, so you can check it out after the panel.
You're also the author of one of my favorite all-time tweets.
Yeah? Which one? There's many.
It is the when you're trying to write some code, but the Force Awakens.
Yeah. I forgot about that. That was so good. I have a Happy Badger Studio. They got me a Chewbacca onesie for Christmas, and I put it to its fullest use and made a really good tweet with it.
It's like sometimes when I hear the term Force Awakens, I don't think about the movie. I think about that tweet, and I laugh every single time. I'm easily amused, but it was great.
Excellent. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Every time I hear someone say, "You're also the author," I'm always like, "Oh, did he write a book? Did he write a book? Oh no, it's a tweet.
I write tweets, not books."
Right. I'm from before tweets. So
you're the content creator of a thing that I like.
My name's Anthony Amato. I'm one half of a board game design company called Cardboard Fortress Games. We have a game out called Resistor, which is in stores now, and we're working, actually going to have a Kickstarter on Tuesday for a game called Laser Riders, laser with a Z, and Riders with a Y and a Z. All of those games are in the other room on a table there. So I make art and do game design on those games and a number of other board games and card games.
And sometimes you fancy wearing a cardboard box on your head.
And sometimes I wear a cardboard box on my head.
Like you do.
Stylish.
I've also done some art for, or some consultation and some art for other board game box designs and layouts and so forth, and stuff like graphic design stuff.
Awesome. So there are a lot of different kinds of art. There are a lot of avenues into art, but into getting into the world of gaming and using your artistic abilities in that, what was the genesis of that for you? Like, how did you guys get started when you were like, I'm going to take this art thing that I do and I'm going to make it interactive and playable and stuff?
That, for me, was not necessarily a planned thing. So I went to art school and I studied illustration, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I liked the entertainment industry, but I didn't think about games in particular as like a career avenue. And so when I graduated, I was really smart, so I moved out to the most expensive area in the country, the Bay Area, with no job. Really, really good idea with an art degree. And then, but the industry out there is a lot of tech and a lot of interaction and a lot of interactive design. And so I sort of ended up falling into games that way. And it's been great. I love it. I love making media for that is consumable but still able to like tell a story and transport people to a different world.
What was your first game project?
So I was hired on Shard before most of my other ones. Some of my first game projects, I guess before that, were more sort of storyboard focused or storybook focused. So like games for kids that were sort of interactive narrative or like a point and click adventure. So that sort of tied into my illustration degree a little more closely than, say, like a 3D game or something.
Yeah, for me, I kind of just like naturally drifted into it because like my mom's an artist and my dad was a musician and also was like really into computers. Like he programmed a lot, and so it kind of like made sense. It's just like, okay, art plus programming. I want to do art for games. Like that kind of like made sense. And like ever since I was a kid. I would notice things like that in games. I would be like, hey, look, that tree isn't actually 3D. It's just like a 2D plane that always faces you. So I would just like notice small things like that, and then my friends would just be like, what? Why point that out? Just play the game. and so like I would just notice things like that and just notice the like mind tricks they play on you to achieve a certain effect. And I'm just like, I'm interested in that. And so I kind of delved into it later when I was like 15 or something. I downloaded this program called Blender, and then I got scared of it and then just like closed it out and was just like, all right, never touching that again. And then I came back like a month later and like loaded up a tutorial and I was just like, okay, this kind of makes sense. I can kind of get a grasp on this. So that's how I started with 3D modeling. Then I started getting into texturing too because I like having an interest in art. Like I was just like drawing and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's kind of like how it sprouted for me.
And what was your first completed project then?
Fish. I have a game called Fish right now. You play as a little fish creature, and you had to eat smaller things to get bigger and avoid the bigger fish. That was my first like release thing. It was a part of a game jam. It was a Ludum Dare game jam. You're given a theme. The theme was evolution, and I had 48 hours to make it. And like that was the first time I ever did a game jam. I didn't think I could ever like actually finish something, but hey, like I went for it and tried it, and I made my first game that's on Steam now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really great.
How did I get into art? That was a question.
Yeah, what was how did you first decide to apply your art to video games?
Well, board games for me, but
Board games, sorry.
I'd love to do art for video games. So when I was young, I always wanted to be an illustrator, and I liked fine arts and illustration a lot. I always thought I would do book illustration of some kind. But life said otherwise, and I didn't end up doing any of that for a long time. And more recently, we came up with the game Resistor, and we started a company to do Resistor. And because I had a little bit of practice in art, it was advantageous for us to have me do the art for Resistor. Usually you would hire out for artists in the board game world. But since I was able to do both of those roles, I started doing art for board games. And since it wasn't bad, some people asked me to do some stuff for them and help out. And it's been real helpful for our company that our prototypes and so forth, I'm able to do the art and think about the art end of it. So they always come out looking better than they probably should for the where they are in development, if that makes sense. And my first game was Resistor. First published art, I should say, was our game Resistor. Yeah.
How much actual like art elements goes into a game like that? Like how many individual pieces did you create for that game?
For a game like Resistor?
Yeah.
Essentially none. Resistor's art is almost entirely graphic design kind of stuff. None of it's serious, like sit down and draw kind of illustration. It's all handled with, layers and effects and stuff like that.
That is still art.
Yeah, it's still art. Well, you said how many pieces? No pieces in particular.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of like, here's what the box will look like. Here's the box flattened out. Send that to the printers. They're going to fold it up like this. None of it's really like, hey, like if I was hiring somebody for it, I couldn't say, I need a picture of this guy shooting another guy with a gun, and they look like this. Like that doesn't work that way. It's more of, how am I going to fit all this text on here and make it look cool, and then how am I going to make the box look like it's a computer even though it's just a cardboard box and stuff like that. So,
So, what are your guys' go-to tools then for making game art? Because I think if you're a traditional artist, you use traditional tools. If you are a graphic designer, you're probably using Illustrator and Photoshop. As artists for video games, all of those tools are available to you, but there's probably some other stuff. So, what's in your skill set in your toolbox?
So day to day, most of what I use is Photoshop and my Cintiq tablet, which, if you're not familiar, is really great. It's like a separate screen that you can just draw directly on. I've gotten pretty used to that. So I've been doing digital art since high school. That's when I first got my first tiny little tablet. But most of my formal training and things that I really love to do is physical media, always physical media. So like filling up sketchbooks, doing watercolor and gouache paintings. I do that as much as I possibly can, but for game art specifically, and for in-game assets, that doesn't make much sense if you want to make things very fast and be able to iterate on them quickly. So the game that I'm making right now has a lot of 2D sprites and everything. So I do a lot of concept art just in my sketchbook. I do some painted concepts, but all of the art that's in the game is purely digital.
Yeah. For me, my motto is kind of like the freer the better. Free software is great. I use because I started out with Unity, and the only reason I even downloaded Unity is because it was free. Like, I was 13, and I was just like, hey, look at this free thing that I can just get. I didn't really know what it was capable of, but I got it anyway. And so Blender is also free, and it's just amazing, the free resources that are out there that can enable you to do pretty much just anything you want to do. For textures and things like that, I would use this program called Macromedia Fireworks. It's way outdated, but honestly, it's the best thing. I can't find anything like it. It's really good for vector art, and which really works out for me because my games have often a really minimalist style, so not a bunch of texture, but really bold colors and things like that. And so having that vector art program is really useful. I just wish that Adobe would keep updating it, but yeah.
It's amazing. I've been a professional graphic designer for 16 years, and you're the first Fireworks user I have met in person. I've seen them in forums and things, but I've never met somebody in person who used that program.
Everyone's yeah, Photoshop, and I'm just okay, yeah, Photoshop, but it doesn't have this one specific feature that Fireworks has that I wish that they would just bring
Also,
back.
I've never even heard
pro
of that
tip, if you
Yeah, it's
are a student and you sign up for a Photoshop subscription now, they won't know when you're not a student anymore, and you will keep getting student prices. So if you're a student, do it now.
And you also mentioned Blender. What is Blender?
Yeah, so Blender is it's a 3D modeling program. It's Maya or 3ds Max are the paid equivalents of it. But Blender is a very powerful engine. It's open source, so you can modify it however you want. And recently they updated it to where it's a lot more user friendly. Because the first time I opened it, it was version 2.5 or something. I could not tell what I was looking at. I was just what is this? I couldn't tell I was looking at a 3D object, but it was a cube. Yeah, it was really confusing. But yeah, if you just look up YouTube tutorials, it's a really powerful engine. You can do a lot in it, and I've been using it for years, and I'm still discovering new things that I just had no idea it could do. So yeah, you can render movies in it, and you can make game assets. You can make textures. You can even do video stabilization. It really covers a lot of ground.
I think I would mirror that statement that YouTube tutorials is
YouTube
probably
tutorials.
the biggest tool that I use.
Yeah, YouTube tutorials. That's how I got my job. That's how I have that's how I'm like here, YouTube and Google. Like
Readings for chumps. Just show me how to do it.
That was my next question. So I still want to hear what your tools are, but yeah, my next question is all about resources. So yeah,
Well, I do. I'm from the Photoshop camp, so I do everything in Photoshop. I'm not saying that's right. You probably should do Illustrator. If you're doing the kind of things I'm doing, then Illustrator is actually what you want to be using. I just know Photoshop and don't know Illustrator.
And if you don't have money, there's GIMP, there's Inkscape.
Absolutely. There's
A lot
probably
of
equivalent free versions of everything I'm saying, but I'm not scared of uTorrent, so I'm not shy on that.
When I was 13, like, oh man, FrostWire or whatever it was called, that was my thing.
Pay for your products though, don't
But
listen
pay
to
for
me.
your stuff. Yeah, people need money.
So, when we talk about the resources, you mentioned YouTube. I mean, YouTube is a fantastic resource for finding anything. Along with that, I mean, are there communities that you found where you could communicate this stuff? Are there magazines you read, books? What other stuff did you go to and said, like, this gaming thing is another skill set on top of just being art. So how did you supplement that other than YouTube?
Yeah, Twitter for one, actually. There's a huge, like, every single game developer, well, not every single one, but like so many game developers are on Twitter. Like, there's a huge community, and that's how I really got started. That's how I got my name out there. That's how like anyone in the game industry knows who I am, is through Twitter. Like, I would just upload screenshots of stuff I'm making, just like anything, and also reaching out to people, just being like, hey, I like your stuff, how did you do this? Or like, does anyone have any tips for this? Or like, hey, I'll see you at this event. And the indie community is super nice, so I totally recommend just like getting on Twitter or something and just like meeting other people who are doing similar things.
Yeah, people are often pretty shy about approaching creators that they like, but creators love being asked specific questions about like process and things like that. So don't be shy about that in particular.
Usually people that do something for a living have a lot rattle around in their brain, and it's a nice little like outlet for somebody to say, how do you do that? And they're like, well, funny you should say, because I think about it for 9 hours a day, and I have some thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're usually pretty willing to share. So, what challenges did you run into when you started doing this? Like the first areas where maybe you didn't understand what it would take to make something that is not static. I mean, most of the time in games, there are some games, if it's like an interactive fictional thing or something like that, where like there are static components, but most of the time stuff moves, characters go around, it's interactive. So like what challenges did you encounter making art for that?
One of the things that I wasn't necessarily super prepared for in taking contract work was how varied of different art styles that you have to sort of familiarize yourself with and get proficient enough at in order to make the game assets. So one of the games that I made was a pixel art game, and I had never made pixel art before. And so it's like a completely different process. It's totally different from, the regular painting that I was doing, especially the physical media painting that I was doing. And so really being able to do your research, look up what other people are doing and their process, it's super important, and you can learn a ton that way.
Yeah. I'll say one thing, rigging is a pain in the butt, which is, it's the act of giving your 3D model like actual bones so that they can like bend their limbs. So if you're modeling like a hand, it'll make it where the hand can just like bend. That's a pain. Just wanted to call that out in particular. But I haven't had honestly that many challenges when it comes to actually like making things. But what was more of a challenge for me was figuring out like I guess my career path because coming out of high school, everyone's telling me, go to college. Yeah, go to college. You need college, absolutely. And I'm just like, college costs a lot of money. I don't know. And so I was hired actually, like right out of high school by Happy Badger Studio. Once again, Twitter. They saw my work on Twitter, and they were just like, hey, you want to come on by the studio? And like, they ended up offering me a job, and I'm just like, wow, like this is amazing. This is like my dream job right here.
Cheat code, warp zone.
Yeah, cheat code. And so like I at that time I thought I would still end up in like college, but then just like going forward, I'm just like I'm learning everything that's essential to like my career. Like I'm learning it on my own. And like I'm not saying don't go to college, but it's just like for me it was just this like weird thing of like half the people in my life were saying, yeah, go to college, and then half the people are saying, yeah, you really don't need it, you're so talented. And so that was an internal struggle for me. But like I've settled on just like keeping to doing what I'm doing and refining my skills, and I think I'll be fine. It'll all be fine.
You're really going to miss that 101 course in basket weaving someday, though.
I
You're gonna be
know,
like
I know, I regret
45,
it.
be like, why didn't I take that course on remedial Spanish Inquisition art?
Yeah, and take out that huge student loan.
Right,
It burns
that
me inside
$3,000
every
I
day.
spent on that class that I didn't need.
I'll take
I've got
that course
feelings.
over a 10 to rest of your life course in filing papers,
Yeah.
which is your work.
Anthony, for games, so you've got a different challenge. It's for
Not a lot of
tabletop games.
animation in tabletop games.
Right, exactly. So you're not dealing with animation, but you're dealing instead with physical product, sizing and usability. The interactivity is completely different. So when I think about like things like, let's say like a Magic the Gathering, where like you have tons and tons and tons of art, and it's big epic fights and itty bitty art.
Yep. Yep.
So how do you approach that when you're making packaging, when you're making the game elements themselves, and thinking about the spatial awareness and how people will use it?
Well, that's one of the situations where I really think it's helpful to be not just an artist, but also a game designer, because from my point of view, and I think this should be done more often, is that you really have to be thinking about the art and the graphic design and the physicality of the board game you're making, the card game, everything. You got to think about how the card's going to get played by people normally, how do they display them in their hands, how do they lay them down, what order they put them down, how do the things go on top of other things, and so forth. And all that stuff is important, and it's very much a graphic design, I can't think of the word, a usability kind of element, and how you lay the information out on cards and on board pieces is all very important to both the mechanics of the game, and the art will inform the mechanics of the game, and vice versa, right? The mechanics will inform how the art needs to be done as well. So that's always a challenge, and I think that's a really fun part of it, and it's one of the things that I'd like to see, taken into account more often. The graphic designer and the artist in the board game realm should be involved in the game design part of it earlier, if not, whole cloth. So that's one challenge. The other one I would say is obviously having to learn all of the sort of manufacturing end of things. What sort of, all the nuts and bolts, the CMYK, sort of issue, the resolutions, layouts, register, when you send something to get printed, making sure that it's going to double side properly if you want it double-sided and bleed and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of basic stuff to most graphic designers, but if you haven't done it, it's all interesting to learn. Like I had to, for a rule book for the rule book for Resistor, I did it all in Photoshop like a dummy, you know what I mean? But it should have been done in InDesign, which meant I had to like go and get InDesign and crash course myself in InDesign. And then I probably forgot most of that at this point. But when I have to do another rule book, I'll have to do that again. So that's challenging. And then there's a lot of interfacing with the manufacturer and just figuring out how to make it easier for them, how to, what kind of things they're going to get back, the back and forth of that. That's a challenge.
Is there anything that you guys ran into that you just found that you just sucked at to begin with? That it was like you really rammed your head against the wall and then you broke through and defeated the big boss?
Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say. Sorry, the other thing I was going to say was the challenges. Another challenge is knowing your own limitations in regards to what can be done for your game. If you're part of a big company, it's not that big a deal. Your job is to handle this one little thing, not little thing. I shouldn't say that. One part of it, right? Like if you're doing the concept art for a video game, then your responsibility is concept art for the video game, and somebody else will pick up the other stuff. But when you're in the board game world, the companies just generally aren't that big. So you really have to gauge how much you can put into any given thing and be like, all right, this is what it's going to be. This is my limitations on what I can do for this because I need to move on to the next thing. I can't like sit and try to figure out, for days on end how to do a thing that it's just not worth it for the overall project. So that's another big part. Knowing when to hire out, knowing how much is within the budget to hire out for also is another, thing. Like, we're only going to get this much money on Kickstarter for this. We can't get Magic the Gathering level like painting art for this game. It's just not going to be possible. So from the outset, we need to understand that that's not what this game is going to look like.
I want to step back on something you said there because you were talking about hiring out, and it brings up a good question: is as a game artist, how are you getting those gigs? How are you? I mean, you said you found it on Twitter. How are you finding those jobs, and how are you guys finding people to work for you?
So a lot of it is word of mouth. A lot of it comes from, so a lot of the contracts that I've gotten are from people that I know, people who know my work, and people that I see day to day. I'm in the Bay Area, and I work out of this indie games co-op space. So that's great for meeting people and meeting people who are working on a really big variety of projects. It also comes from being on the internet. So my work on Shard, the game that I've been working on for the longest, my coworker actually hired me initially as a contractor. Right now we co-own the company, so I'm no longer working under him. We're more adjacent. But originally I was a contractor on that project, and he found my work online through a friend of a friend who was an alumni at my school. So it's really roundabout, and I think the best advice that I can say is just cover all of your bases. So be on the internet, have a blog you update regularly, be on Twitter, but also be out in the real world and go to game meetups, go visit co-working spaces, go to conferences. And once you sort of get that network and start meeting people and making friends, then people will start looking at your work, and if your work is good and if it's on the internet, they'll hire you.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to back that up. Just put yourself out there, make sure that your art is somewhere where people can see it, and basically just anything can happen. So it's more of just putting yourself in the opportunity for something really cool to happen. So yeah, definitely show off your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It also helps to enjoy the thing that you're doing the art for. So if you want to do art for board games, you should be a board game player, and you should be at the places where the board game designers and the board game players are playing board games.
Yeah, and on that note, if you make art for things that you like, then that's what you're going to be showing on your online portfolio, and then those are the kinds of jobs you get hired for. So it's kind of this positive feedback loop where if you put up work online that you did for projects that you weren't super into, people will hire you for those again because that's what they think you do. So make sure the work you're showing is the work you like to do.
Yeah, and always do your best. Like when I made Resistor, it was my game and I didn't have any constraints, so I made it the best that I could at that point. And then once you have a thing out and you're in the community, that is your resume, right? If you did your best, then people will see it and they'll want that if you're involved with the people that are looking for artists.
So I worked with a digital agency for a long time, and I was a hiring manager for a while. And something I want to throw in here that I think is relevant is that a lot of times people, as you're first getting started, and you're like, I do a thing, and I want people to hire me. A lot of people will say, I just need somebody to give me a shot. I just need somebody to give me that first in. On the flip side of it, for people who are hiring, every time they hire somebody, pay somebody to bring them in as a contractor or an employee, they're taking a chance. They're looking at everything that everybody brings to the table who wants that job, weighing out who brings the most to the table with the least amount of risk. You have to make yourself as attractive as possible for people who would potentially hire you. You need to have a critical eye towards your own portfolio, towards your own stuff. If you are barely past the drawing things with pencil stage and haven't figured out how to do stuff digitally, submitting to Blizzard is not going to get you a shot. Somebody's not going to take a chance on you. They're not going to see your potential. They're going to see somebody who is not yet ready for prime time. So as you know, I'm not saying that you need to be the best artist out there on the planet, but you need to be competent, you need to be able to show that you have skills and that you can get the work done. And then a lot of it is building reputation afterwards as far as being somebody that people know that can actually do the stuff. But if you want somebody to take the chance on you, you have to make that gamble seem as good a chance as possible for them to get what they're really looking for.
Yeah, and I think that there's a small degree of fake it till you make it or fake it till you are it, and there's certainly set challenges so you can step up to that plate, and that could be in that world. But I also think it's super important to really be honest about what's feasible, right? So I've turned down a few jobs that are like, I really like your work. Do you think you could do this? And I have to say, like, I actually don't think I could do that, and I think you could probably do better hiring somebody else for that. I'm also not doing this for a living, so it doesn't really hurt my rent to turn that down. But I think that's important to be true to what's possible for yourself at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for art, whether in games or beyond it, what are the big influences for you guys? What's the stuff that made you go, oh, I saw that tree in the background, and that was a sucky tree. And
Sonic Adventure 2. Yeah, the Sonic games in general, I just grew up with them. I love them. Just GameCube games, the early ones on the Sega Genesis, that's what I grew up with, and those are really bright, colorful games. So that it kind of really influenced my art style too, because I like to use really saturated colors and just really eye-popping things. And so yeah, that really influenced that. More on the non-retro side, Mirror's Edge also, that game has in my opinion, some of the best art direction I've ever seen, and so that really piqued my interest in lighting. I really like lighting and shading and things like that, and so that game definitely really defined that for me. And also things that aren't games, a lot of movies I look at, I just look at the art style, I'm just yes, this is beautiful. A lot of Miyazaki films are my favorite. I'm just if I could mimic that in a game, I would, that would be ideal.
Seconded. Love Miyazaki movies. That's probably one of my primary artistic influences. I also, I love comics, and French comics especially. Mobius is one of my favorite artists who ever walked the earth. He's amazing. But I also get a lot of my inspiration from books. So I read a ton, and I have ever since I was really small. It used to be a lot of high fantasy stuff, but it sort of segued into magical realism more lately. And those are the kinds of things that I find really interesting, because they're taking worlds that we know and that we're familiar with, and they're sort of putting a twist on it. And so things like that I find really inspiring. And along that same vein, the game that I was talking about before we started, Kentucky Route Zero, is one of my favorite games. And it has this really amazing emotional tone to it, which I think is really, really hard to get in games. It's sort of a quiet, contemplative game that is, it's amazing. Y'all should play it.
I'm going to argue for Journey on that one.
Oh yeah.
Journey is the best.
Journey is the best. If you like Journey, you should follow Matt Nava. He's the art director for that, and he recently released this game Abzu that's also beautiful.
Yes.
Is that the swimming one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw
it's
that.
Gorgeous.
For me, I don't know. It's really hard for me because I'm bad with names. Also, I can't really nail down a lot that's super influential.
I like the work of Steve. Steve's great.
Do you know this game? It looks like this. I'm really interested in when someone, I'm failing at thinking of an example of this. When someone takes a game and puts a theme on it and really brings that theme, a cohesive style across the whole thing. Maybe if you think about, if you've seen Secret Hitler as a board game that's out right now, and it all has a very World War II 40s vibe, but it's all done super flat and with desaturated colors. And for instance, the box looks like it's worn, like it's been in someone's basement for a long time. But that worn element is all done in a big, chunky kind of shapes, not very accurate worn, but it gets the sense across. Look it up; it looks amazing. Another one in the video game world would be like Vlambeer's Luftrauser, where they decided to take everything and only use 3 colors, and it's all very super flat and chunky, but it's nice. I like that. So anything where somebody's taken a kind of genre or a theme or a certain nostalgia and applied it to the whole thing. Strafe. If you've seen the video game Strafe, looks amazing. It looks like an old Quake game. It looks like it's from that time. Didn't need to look that way, but they decided to make it look that way. And then they did a trailer that looks like it was straight out of the 90s. I love that.
Well, something I think is really interesting within the gaming world, especially like the last years, like we've leveled it up, and then as the independent gaming rose up, it kind of took it back. I mean, for those of us that grew up with 8-bit, we still like to play 8-bit stuff, and we like things that look like that, but like still have like next-gen functionality. As artists too, I'd say that if you find that you have certain limitations, or you have things that you run into where you're like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to draw these big epic things. I may not be doing art on Uncharted or Blizzard game or something, but there are successful games out there that are 8-bit style. Some things, you go into like online forums, like there's a game series I love that's called Deep Sleep, and it's all in black and white, and it's all pixelated, and it is not great art, but it is evocative, and it makes you feel the mood of things, and that art to me is just as effective as as other stuff. It's working well with the game design.
Yeah, I think a perfect example is the game Undertale. It's like super simple art style, just made by one guy in Game Maker, and it's just like, it's super simple, like almost like anyone getting started in games could have done it. But the thing is, he tells a story so well, like it's so well written and there's so many emotions you feel attached to the characters, and the mechanics are like amazing, that the mechanics influence the story, and just like, it really shows you that it depends, that what really matters is just like the story you tell and the actual game, more than just the visuals. Like the visuals will definitely complement it, but it really shows you that you don't need like a AAA studio to make a really great experience.
Certainly video games aren't my area of expertise, but I follow it quite a bit. And to me, it seems like as the technical barriers kind of fall away, the question, it's not exciting to ask the question of can we do it anymore. It's more exciting to think about why. A great example would be the Transformer movies, the recent Transformers movies, right? Awful design on those robots. They're just terrible. They're just a mess of bits and pieces that are unreadable on the screen in the moments. And people could argue with me about that if they want. But the point is, there was definitely how much can we push the limits of the capabilities of CG here, not should we push the limits of the CG here, right? So that in video games, a Modern Warfare or so forth can look nearly photorealistic, Uncanny Valley aside, but is it really pulling that forward when you have a game like Overwatch? And they're certainly capable of doing that at Blizzard, and they decided not to, because a more Disney-esque sort of characterization certainly is giving them a lot more traction with players than it would otherwise.
Well, and in games, user experience is what matters, and what you've delivered to them, what it makes them feel, the intended result of it. It's not just about making something really pretty or something really proficient, but at the end, you want them to identify with it in that right way, whether it's like a feeling of warmth or if it's a feeling of distance or anger or something. It should really deliver that.
Yeah,
Right.
in a board game scenario, you can think about a lot of older kind of 70s board games would do, have like a farming theme and do a very like strict kind of fine arts painterly, landscapes and so forth. And then you have newer games nowadays like Imperial Settlers, where they decide to have everybody look like little chibi button characters, you know what I mean? Even though it's still about Mongols and Romans invading each other, they didn't do that because that wouldn't bring across the tone or the feeling of the game that they were going for. It was a lighter experience. It was more kind of joking, attacking each other, and raiding villages and so forth. It wasn't a super serious kind of affair, so that wouldn't have been appropriate in that situation.
Yeah. I think you really don't need to be a good draftsman to make a good game, but you do need to get across a feeling. So you don't even need to be like a programmer to make a video game. There's so many text-based games out there that will give you a really, like a window into a different world that's super evocative, but has no art, maybe like some minimal music, but is still really, really effective at getting you, like transporting you to that different place. So it's not necessary, but if you like it, there's lots of places for it.
All right, I think we have just a couple of minutes, and I'd like to open it up to Q&A. So if you guys have questions, just raise your hands, and I'll pick you out. And you in the white hat, yes.
Yeah, so one of the things that inspired Fish was I saw this article that was like, here's what a drop of water from the ocean looks like under a microscope, and like I was like, hey, that looks a lot like Fish, and like, yeah, it was just this like really zoomed in, just like piece of water, and there's all these like little creatures in it, and like they had really interesting shapes and colors, so like. Visually, I took from that a lot. I kind of took from that, and also there's this game called Electroplankton for the DS that also inspired it. So yeah, I just kind of like combined those two, and as far as the Fish's functions, like there's one Fish that makes you smaller. I tried to put as much like visual cue in there as I could. So like the red Fish is. Or that Fish is red, so like it communicates, oh, this does something bad, it harms you. And like the pink Fish, you use it to reproduce, and it's just like, okay, pink, it's a color of fertility or whatever. So yeah, I was trying to like get a little bit into the psychology of colors there.
Yo, that jacket is fertile as hell then, right?
Yeah, man.
We have another one? Yes.
Ooh, conventions, a lot of conventions.
Yes.
And if you can't afford tickets, look into volunteering, because volunteers get free tickets, and you get to interact with the developers a little more because you can be around when they're setting up, when they're showing. And also, I might not be the best to speak on this because I live in the Bay Area and there's lots of tech in general, but it's fairly easy to find meetups via like Twitter, Facebook, meetup.com, just things like that.
Yeah, for the first few years of me being a game developer, I had no idea there was anyone else in St. Louis doing the same thing. Like, I just had no idea. I thought I was just completely alone in this, because everyone I knew on Twitter was just like in another state or another continent. I really thought I was alone. But then just one day I just looked up St. Louis game developers, and boom, there they were. There was a bunch of them. And there's a whole community of them. And so that's how I met the Happy Badgers. That's how I met like everyone I know here. And so yeah, just do research to see what's local, I say, is the best way to find a community.
Yeah, the same. Go to conventions, interact with the people that made the games. You know what I mean? Like Twitter, I suppose, and so forth.
Yeah.
In the board game world, there's conventions for unpublished games, and so at those types of things, Unpub is one of them. They have Proto-Spiels, I think, out here, are they're called. There's one in Jersey that I really like a lot called Metatopia. But if you go to those things and you are smart and talk to the designers and say like, hey, I do art, or if you find people are saying, hey, I need art, and say, I'll do it really cheap, because in the board game world there's a big gulf between art creators and game designers, and the gulf exists because money. Board games don't make a lot of money, and board game designers don't have a lot of money to spend on making board games, and artists need to get paid. So because of that big gulf, there's a lot of games that don't have art and a lot of artists that want to make art for games, and they're not meeting up because of that reason. So unfortunately for everybody who's paying their rent and doing this as a living in the game design world, graphic design and illustrator world, if you want to do art for board games, be cheap or do it for free, and you'll be in. you'll get in instantly that way. But yeah, go to conventions and be involved. Just like I said, play games and be at those places. And that's really all there is to it.
Well, that actually finishes up our time. Everybody here will be walking around during the event, so if you still have more questions, you can hunt any of us down. Just don't be creepy. And or creep away. You're our people. So you can find these guys on the Twitters at that stuff up there. Is there any other specific places that they should be hunting down? A URL or something?
I have a blog that's just anitatung.tumblr.com. My Twitter is a good way to get in touch with me, but I don't tweet that much about video games. It's mostly like news articles and pictures of my cat. So if you're into that, go ahead and follow. But
we're all into cat pics.
It's really not that professional.
Yeah, terrifyingjellyfish.com, also a Tumblr blog. But yeah, that's where you can see just like all my arts and stuff. And yeah, that and Twitter are my two avenues.
Cardboardfortressgames.com is the website for my company. I think all the other contact information's on there. We mostly just post what conventions. We're constantly going to conventions, so it's just, hey, we're going to be here, hey, we're going to be there. So
good places to meet up with people who make games.
There you go. If you want to find out where we're going to be, that's a good place to find
Stalk
out about.
them.
Although it's all East Coast stuff mostly. So.
All right, well, let's give some love and a hand to our panelists here. Thank you much, guys. Enjoy the rest of Pixel Pop.